Chilling tales for dark nights.
Want to make sure you never miss a Chilling Tales for Dark Nights video again? Be sure to subscribe and hit that bell to turn on notifications.
The westbound train will pass the station in 15 minutes. The train is not stopping here.
Jeremy blinked as the rough static of a pre-recorded voice crackled into his ears. All of his limbs burned with pins and needles, trembling at the slightest attempt to move them. Slowly and gradually, he managed to roll onto his side. The slightest shift of any muscle emphasized his pain, sending clumps of dirt crumbling off of his skin. Lost and disoriented, he couldn't yet tell where the pain was coming from. Even with his eyes shut, he could see the glaring blaze of a midday sun. Between the bright light, the dirt in his eyelashes, and the lingering stupor, it took him several attempts to successfully wrench his eyes open. What? Jeremy attempted to speak, immediately breaking into a coughing fit. His mouth was dry as old paper, and dust flooded in through his lips as soon as he opened them. When he sat up, he noticed that the same dust had gathered in a thick layer over his face, arms, and clothes. His pockets were empty and his watch was gone. Oh, shit, he muttered, coughing a little more from the effort. Fighting against his own body, Jeremy climbed to his feet and began to examine his surroundings. Out of instinct, he rubbed his eyes to try and clear his vision, but he immediately regretted it when they stung from the dirt on his hands. He paused, took a deep breath, and blinked a few times until he could see properly. As the shapes of ticket machines, pillars, and metal benches became clear, it was easy to figure out that this was a train station that had been deserted for some time. It was dry, empty, and dirty, with hot air blowing tumbleweeds of glitter around his feet. Fighting back panic, Jeremy spotted what appeared to be a map crumpled amongst a pile of leaves. He darted towards it, tripping over his feet in the process. The pain of sudden movement blistered into frustration when he discovered that the map provided no more information than a child's drawing. It marked 2 platforms on either side of the station in basic lines. A few notches seemed to indicate the path of the tracks, but apart from that, the page was blank. With a wild and angry shout, Jeremy screwed up the paper and flung it out into the wind. "Hello!" he yelled, forcing himself to run toward the platform's edge. "Hello? Anyone?" His mind was starting to catch up to his reality, and with it came a cold, rising panic that gripped him from deep inside his core. Closing his eyes, Jeremy prayed for any form of response. He was met with nothing more than the ghost of his voice in echoes, amplified by the dry wind.
The westbound train will pass the station in 10 minutes. The train is not stopping here.
The sudden presence of the voice made him jump, reminding him again of his pain. He spun around, searching for light, before he realized it was the same recording that had woken him up a few minutes ago. Jeremy's mind was a tangled heap of loose threads between fear and disorientation. He stopped for a moment, closed his eyes, and counted his breath to find his focus. "Come on," he muttered, hoping that the act of speaking out loud might force his brain to start working. "Come on, come on." Holding his hands out in front of him, Jeremy walked toward the end of the station. It couldn't have been more than 50 meters long. 2 platforms separated only by a single pillar. Now that he was starting to focus, he tried to scan the area for anything that might help him. He first noticed the number 1, splashed in red paint next to the platform's edge. Looking further, he could see the number 2, splashed similarly on the other side. Desperate for any explanation of what was happening to him, Jeremy wondered for a moment if he was dreaming. The thought was quickly stifled by the harsh sting of a fresh mosquito bite and the instinctive slap on his arm. In slow, cautious steps, he continued to walk around the station. He didn't know what he was looking for, only that he wasn't finding it. Squinting into the distance, he could see the train tracks stretching toward the horizon. Apart from the tracks, he could see nothing but scrubland and scattered trees in any direction. "Hello!" He yelled as loud as his voice would reach. "Anyone! Please! Help!" He wasn't expecting an answer, but he didn't know what else to do.
The westbound train will pass the station in 8 minutes. You have 8 minutes to save her.
What? Jeremy froze, clutching his chest as if he could catch the sick feeling that leapt towards his throat. What was that? What'd you say?
The westbound train will pass the station in 8 minutes. Your favorite daughter is on that train.
What? Jeremy repeated. He spun around to search for the source of the voice, seeing only an old rusted speaker bolted to the station's roof. "What do you want with my daughter? Who are you?"
The westbound train will pass the station in 7 minutes. Your daughter will die without your intervention. Your favorite daughter.
Favorite? What do you mean, favorite? Jeremy stopped in place, struggling to keep himself from hyperventilating. "I don't have a favorite? Please, stop. Tell me what's going on. Come on."
You're lying.
The voice boomed from the loudspeaker, the volume increasing with every word. It's the same robotic voice that Jeremy had assumed was a recording, but it now held an undercurrent of rage, emphasized in reverb.
The westbound train will pass the station in 6 minutes, traveling at a constant speed of 120 kilometers per hour. The eastbound train is speeding towards it at 90 kilometers per hour. On the wall to your left, you will find a red button.
Jeremy remained rooted to the spot as he processed what the voice was telling him. After the freezing impact of pure terror had subsided enough for him to move, he rushed to follow the instructions. Darting to the left, he saw a fluorescent beam flash into life in front of him, lighting up a neon plastic panel like a beacon. In the center of the panel, Jeremy could see the red button. Next to it, a digital timer displayed a countdown that seemed to click louder with every second that passed.
The red button activates the railroad switch that will divert the westbound train. The switch is 3,000 meters to the east of the station. It will be active for 10 seconds when the button is pressed.
Jeremy looked to his right, furiously wiping sweat from his brow. Through watery eyes, he could just make the point where the track split in two. Walking in a slow circle, he followed the path of the second track. It curved around the station for only a short stretch before reconnecting with the main one.
Neither train will be stopping at the station. If the switch is not activated correctly, the trains will collide when the countdown ends. There is a short window of time wherein pressing the button will prevent the collision. Her life is in your hands.
Jeremy turned back to the panel. The button glowed in his face, distracting him, while he tried to quiet his mind for long enough to focus. Clicking down in sharp rhythmic beats, every timer tick hit him like a punch in the stomach. Come on, he urged himself. He squeezed his eyes shut, his numbers raced through his head. When he finally compelled himself to concentrate, he was interrupted by an approaching train's churning metallic sound. A wordless cry escaped his mouth when he realized that he could see it, cranking along the tracks toward him. He measured his breath to avoid passing out and turned back to the timer. As he began to channel his focus into the task at hand, the screen above the panel flickered into life, broadcasting and crackling black and white footage. Jeremy could see his younger daughter tied to a chair. Window was visible behind her, with undefinable countryside whirring past.
The westbound train will pass the station in 5 minutes. The train is not stopping here.
Jeremy paused to steady his hands, then slapped his face as hard as he could. The impact bristled against sunburn he hadn't noticed. He allowed himself only a moment to rub the sting away before jolting his attention back towards the panel. "Fuck this," he muttered, his lips trembling around the words. I always knew math teachers were sadists. His eyes watered in the sun's light, worsened by the fluorescent beam glowing on his face. Thinking loudly in garbled whispers, he tapped the back of his arm to help himself count. With a sharp hiss of breath, he turned his head to see the westbound train approaching the platform. Turning the other way, he realized he could see the eastbound train chugging into visibility. Shit! Okay. He nodded his head and kept tapping his fingers as numbers swirled through his head. Okay. Come on, Lucy, you got this. You passed this class. He leaned so close to the timer that part of him worried his sweat would hit the button before he was ready. The sound of speeding wheels on metal tracks burned his ears, but he fought himself to keep listening. With one last glance over his shoulder to see the westbound train approaching, he hovered his hand over the button.
The westbound train will pass the station in 4 minutes. The eastbound train is nearly here. It's up to you to prevent the collision.
Jeremy breathed in and out, staring at the countdown timer. Nearly, he reassured himself. Nearly. Nearly.
You seem like you're ready.
Shut up! Jeremy kept his eyes fixed on the timer.
Remember when you said you don't have a favorite daughter?
The air broke with the sound of a grate clanking open before closing again in a crash of noise. Jeremy ran toward the edge of the platform, with one eye remaining locked on the timer. Looking down, he felt himself scream without being able to hear it. His older daughter, bound and gagged, had been thrust onto the tracks. In a rush of terrified adrenaline, he realized that diverting the train would kill her.
The westbound train will pass the station in 2 minutes. It's time to choose.
Sweat dripped down into Jeremy's eyes. He was being beaten down by noises that assaulted him from every direction. Barely able to stand on quivering legs, he kept his calculations in his head, with no idea how to apply them. His vision blurred. He allowed himself to close his eyes for just a moment. He could see the button in front of him, the timer still ticking.
The westbound train has been diverted. It seems you do have a favorite.
The words blasting out from the speaker struck Jeremy's eardrums before his mind caught up to his actions. In front of him, he could see his hand still holding down the button. A rush of warm air hit his back as the westbound train flew along the tracks behind him. Unable to move, he leaned onto the panel as if it could stop him from collapsing. The grainy black and white screen picture showed his younger daughter being untied by men in dark gloves and balaclavas. He felt his toes curl and his joints lock as he braced himself against the urge to turn around.
Your train has arrived.
Jeremy looked up and realized that the eastbound train had stopped at the platform, while the world spun around him in slow motion. 2 masked men stepped out and walked toward him. Jeremy slumped to his knees, with no energy or willpower left to fight. As the men dragged him onto the carriage, he squeezed his eyes shut, terrified that he might accidentally look at the tracks.
You and your family members will now be returned home. We hope you have enjoyed traveling with us. I'm sure this will be a memorable experience.
Chilling tales for dark nights.